Let's continue with question number 4 of race number 0 of the Secureum Bootcamp. So here once again we have a contract snippet, and this contract snippet is a little bit longer than the ones that we had so far, so that might be a little bit more intimidating, but we will soon find out that this is actually, it might even be the easiest question of them all so far. And let's look at point A. So one tip that I give to people who take the race is that they should ignore the code at the beginning. Look at the options of the question first and see what is even relevant, because then you will notice that all of these options here are related to the check within this only if modifier. And then things like this address function, this set address function, you will realize that this entire function is irrelevant to the question. So you can just completely ignore this. If you would have spent time at the beginning reading this entire Solidity snippet, you would have wasted a lot of time, which you actually wouldn't have needed to do. So let's look at all of those options. A says get address returns the expected address if check is true. Get address returns 0, returns the 0 address if check is false. Get address reverts if check is false. So all of these options are about check. Check is a state variable, a Boolean state variable, so it can be true or false. If it is true, it goes into this if block, and within this if block we have this underscore. And I've already mentioned it in a previous question, but this underscore basically represents the body of the function that it decorates. So here we have the getAddress function, and it is being decorated by the only if modifier. So basically you can imagine that you could copy the contents of this getAddress function, copy it, and paste it in here where the underscore is, and it would be functionally equivalent. So if check is true, then execute function body. If not, it doesn't execute a function body. If it doesn't execute a function body, it means that the actual contents of the function getAddress are never executed. So basically you would call getAddress, it goes into only if, check is false, no function body, and it immediately returns without executing anything basically. So with this knowledge, we can say that A returns the expected address if check is true is correct, because if check is true, it goes into the function body and it returns the address from this addresses mapping. As you can see here, the setAddress function allows you to set addresses into a mapping. This mapping is uint to addresses, so the ID would be the uint and the value would be an address. So we can set these addresses here, and here we can get these addresses back. And if the check is true, we get the address. So A is correct. B, getAddress returns 0 address if check is false, or getAddress reverts if check is false. Now if check is false, the function body is not executed. Would this error? No, it wouldn't. It just wouldn't execute whatever is in here. And because this isn't executed, but this function is still expected to return an address, what would it return? Would it revert because there's nothing to return? It would return the 0 address, because in Solidity all variables are initialized with zeros basically. If you have, for example here, the bool check, in this case, it would be false, because when you declare a variable and you don't give it any value that is not 0, it would end up being initialized with the 0 value, and the 0 value for a boolean is a false. The 0 value for an address is the 0 address. The 0 address for a uint is the 0. So basically B is true and not C is true. Now also very interesting here is that this underscore, we could actually put in multiple underscores. We could execute the function body multiple times. We could even do that. We could even do else and execute it under a different condition. We could put it outside, we could put it inside, we can do stuff before the underscore, so before the function body, we can do stuff after the function body. This is pretty flexible, I would say. But the best practices don't do too fancy stuff with modifiers. For example, the best practice is that you are allowed to check state variables within modifiers, but you should not change state modifiers within variables. For example, you should not set check to true here, because usually when we have modifiers, we expect them to not have side effects. We expect them to just be like a check that we do, and before the check and after the check, nothing should be different. They should basically be read-only functions. And this is a best practice. It's not that it's not possible. You totally can do it. We do it whenever we have a reentrancy guard. This reentrancy guard does set a variable to true and then to false, or to 1 and then to 0, to check whether the function has already been entered or not. So the reentrancy guards do have to set a state variable in order to work, to do their job. But in general, you should really avoid doing this, because when you are reviewing code and you just see here get address only if or only admin, so we can also add more modifiers here. We could do only admin, and it's simply space separated. When we have these modifiers and it's called only admin, I would expect that it checks whether the caller is an administrator. I would not expect it to have any side effects like updating a variable, increasing a counter, or anything like that. So be very sure that if you have some crazy modifier that does update the state, you should probably give it like a really clear name as the modifier, so it can be easily identified as a modifier that does change the state. So we saw that it does not revert, so C cannot be true, and it cannot be D, none of the above, because A and B are true. And that's that.